I really thank all of you for making it to this morning's session. And I also thank all of you, some of you who joined us yesterday. We had a very successful day yesterday in the morning and in the afternoon. And of course, Bob was there, Edmund was there, and Robert was there. So for some of you who are joining us for the first time, I really want to welcome you on behalf of CMPI and SPAR Rodgers. The Dean probably will join us later, and of course, the Gershowitz. So they sent me a message that they will join later on. So I'd like to turn it over to Edmund to bring in Joseph, who will moderate the next session. Edmund.
Yes, I would like to thank everyone who's participated yesterday and welcome everybody back for the second day of the 8th Annual Gershowitz Conference on Peace and Democratic Governance, on Media and Democratic Governance, should I say. And let me now turn the floor over to Joseph Hammond, who is the Vice Chair of the Center for Media and Peace Initiatives.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. The topic of today's panel will be, COVID-19. It's affected all of us economically, socially. We can't travel right now. But what will come after COVID-19? What will the effects be in terms of international politics? World Bank has said it will cost about $1.2 trillion to recover from this crisis. And in particular, this panel is a hybrid because I've long dreamed of having a small states focused summit. So we're going to do a special focus on small states today. And for that, we're joined, first, let me recognize His Excellency Aswandi Ahmad from a member of parliament, a parliamentarian from Brunei. We were also waiting to be joined by another member of parliament who we hope will join us, Lord Fetsua of Tonga, who's a member of parliament from Tonga and the head of the Commonwealth Council for Human Rights for the Pacific Islands, who is the one panelist we haven't spoken to today. Mohammed Magassi, who's a member of parliament and as an independent from Gambia, was not able to join today, but he sent his regards. I've forwarded to all of you a voice note that he gave in lieu of physical attendance today. So if you didn't get that, let me know.
Sorry, Edmund is going to play the recorded version when you want him to do that.
Okay, well, yeah, I'll do, after I finish speaking, we can just play that recording if anyone hasn't heard it. Tembiek Julius Chine is the Director of Social Integration and Welfare at the African Caribbean Pacific Diaspora Youth Support Services. Now, ACP is a very interesting organization because it links Africa, it links the Caribbean, and it links the Pacific Islands in an intergovernmental organization that is quite unique to have all those three regions linked together. They share a number of developmental challenges amongst them. Obviously, what is it? Is it Tolstoy? Each family who is happy in their own way, but each family is unhappy in their own way. I've totally butchered that quote from Tolstoy. But while they all have individual developmental challenges, there are some similarities across those three regions. Perhaps that today. And then finally, from the ASEAN Caribbean Council, Matthew Youngson, the Datu from the Sultanate of Sulu as well. I think we can start off. Yes, Edmund, if you have that clip ready to go from the Member of Parliament from Gambia, the Honorable Mohammed Magassi, maybe we can start off with that, if that's ready to go.
Good morning, dear listeners. I am very happy to speak to you at this particular moment on COVID-19 and the post-COVID-19, especially what Africa has to do after COVID-19 is declared eradicated. We have seen that COVID-19 has been a challenge, a health challenge that also challenge the development of the world, challenge interactions among individuals across the world, challenge the education system all over the world, challenge trade and so on, so forth. What we have learned that there's a need to be more innovative, to be more pragmatic, and to think beyond the imagination. To do so, my advice to all governments in the world that for COVID-19 preparedness, we need to strengthen our health systems. In terms of material capacity, in terms of human capacity, and the mobility capacity. Because what we have learned during those short periods, lack of these necessities has contributed to the spread and the long stay of this virus. And again, to come together, endeavor to come up with a vaccine, so that not only coronavirus, but any dangerous and infectious disease like coronavirus, if they have come to appear, we can take measures in order to mitigate it. Again, to education sector, it is high time now that we think of making good use of technology. Coronavirus has created a situation, has even forced us to go into the situation. Why? Because we shouldn't come together at one place. If we have to come together also, we have to keep social distancing. And keeping social distancing in Africa, especially the schools, we are not prepared for it. That means the environment was not conducive for such. There's no space enough. Unfortunately, in some countries, at some communities, you may see a classroom inundated of students because of lack of space. A class that should take a capacity of 30 students might be populated by 90 because of a lack of resources. And the COVID-19 has taught us to think beyond imagination, so that technology education, education through media, education through television, radio, education through internet will be given a chance. And the trial has taken its place, and we have seen the impact despite the challenges, because we have at least ensured continuity, but in a very inefficient and ineffective manner. In order to be more effective and efficient, there is a need to think pragmatically, so that post-COVID-19 media education or technological education, or education through technology, will become a policy guide, so that whether there's corona or there's no corona, or any type of infectious and dangerous disease that will not permit people to come together at one place, by then we have the system in place. We can easily use it because we are prepared for it. And Africa need to think, double think about the trading system. If such atmosphere has to come again, because we could see the borders were closed, air-space borders, land space borders, water space borders, they are all closed. There's no flow of materials from one country to another. There's no movement. That's a challenge. So many protocols as far as free movement of people, goods and services are concerned. And we cannot go without each other because the humanity which is in question, humanity is at the universe. The universe is at the service of the humanity, regardless of continents, division, regardless of regional divisions. What is important, the world is a global village where everybody needs each other. So therefore, if there is no movement, obviously it will be very difficult to ensure development. So therefore, the trading system within Africa and between Africa and the rest of the world need to be reviewed in a pragmatic way so that we can think beyond imagination to cater for unseen situation. Whenever it occurs, we know how to handle it. With these few remarks, good listeners, I really want to thank you. This is coming from Honorable Mohamed Magasi, National Assembly member for Basse constituency in the Republic of the Gambia, double as a member of ECOWAS Parliament. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We've been again listening to Mohamed Magassi, the member of parliament for the Gambia, who was really one of the people who was, one of the few independent politicians when Jammeh, the longtime dictator of the Gambia, was in power, and has twice won election as an independent, which is really, when you think about it, quite remarkable in Africa. I don't know really many independent candidates winning elections doing party politics other than to play out in different countries. But let's move on to kind of the topics and talk about COVID. I would love to hear. I know Dr. Yatunde has commitments later this afternoon, so maybe she could start off and talk about how she, to comment on geopolitical realities after COVID, and now, as we were talking earlier, after the U.S. election as well.
Thank you, everyone, for having me. Thank you, Dr. Ekewo and Joseph, for inviting me on this platform. And also hello to Dr. Schick. We sort of go back to the spa days during Dean Holzer, so it's great to see you on here. So yes, interestingly enough, as you know, small states, also considered small vulnerable economies, are facing what we call a severe economic shock, right? That's rarely sort of being discussed it's discussed in the international playing field, but when we talk about mainstream media, of course, everything is focused on the US election. But with that case, I think one of the most important things that we have to look at when it comes to small states and vulnerable economies is that due to their population size and due to their economic base, they're very vulnerable to exogenous shocks, such as natural disasters, which they face mostly all the time, climate change as well, and also limited economic opportunities. So if you look at Fiji, if you look at Bermuda, if you look at the French Polynesian, if you look at some of these areas that are highly dependent on tourism, you know that those islands have been shut down and have faced economic shocks due to that and due to COVID-related issues. If you look at Vanuatu, who I think it was in April, I think during the height of the pandemic, had what we call a cyclone. I mean, that almost kind of wiped out their whole area, wiping out medical clinics, affecting children, displacing people. So not only are they dealing with the impact of climate change and the impact of natural disasters, it's also coupled with the impact of COVID-19. So not having access to adequate medical facilities or not necessarily getting the necessary financial help, possibly from financial international institutions. And one of the things I think that a lot of the small states have been sort of trying to advocate for is also debt relief. So in this time, and they've always been doing that, but I think in this time it's even more the fact that they're trying to ensure that they don't have to pay any money back that they don't have, or the money that they need to use in order to prevent COVID-related issues. Now, the interesting thing is that, we still have some non-self-governing states that are around there, right, that are still being controlled by United Kingdom, Northern Ireland, and France, right? So we don't necessarily talk about what the impact of COVID-19 is on these areas such as the French Polynesian, Guam, well, we have Guam, and other areas that have an impact that are still sort of dependent on their administrating power in this day and age. And you don't see that. So when in regards to COVID-19 and where we are at now, and really, I think, when we look at the role of the United States, who is more so have taken an isolationist approach, and not the approach which was more so international and being more of an advocate for other countries. We've kind of taken that approach where we need to focus on our own backyard and focus on the issues that are happening here in the United States, or only focus on the areas where our self-interest lies. Yes, we do that all the time, but prior to that, I don't think it was this much of a stretch in the spectrum where we've taken this in isolationist approach. Now, with that being said, how does what is going on here in the United States impact small states in the impact of COVID-19? Small states always need advocacy. They need advocacy from the World Bank. They need advocacy from UNICEF. They need advocacy from the UN. They need advocacy from the World Trade Organization, right? Those are the major global governing powers that institutionally that can sort of advocate on their behalf. But United States plays a very pivotal role in all of these institutions, right? So if we are not sort of at the forefront advocating for these small states or trying to sort of meet them halfway in either debt relief or providing them the means to combat COVID-19, then they have to figure these things out for themselves, right? And do they have the capacity to figure these things out for themselves? Do they have the economic capacity? Do they have the resources that are needed? Do they have the infrastructure that is needed? So all of those things come into play and come into question. But we are at a space here in the United States where do we have the bandwidth to focus on that, which is really the question. We are in a very sort of delicate dance, I would say, on how we sort of position ourselves in the world. And we've seen that in the last sort of 4 years. But right now we're really at a critical point where how does the United States sort of go forward in what before has been a more a different approach for past presidencies, right? So each president has their own ideological bent. They have their own direction of how the United States should go. They have their own choices on what is their self-interest at the time and what is the nation's self-interest. So we have to sort of understand that as each presidency comes into line, that pendulum swing is going to shift and affect global affairs and affect global politics. And that's sort of what we're seeing right now. So I just feel that with COVID-19, a lot of governments at all levels are sort of operating in a context of what we call radical uncertainty, basically. And they're faced with these trade-offs that have to do with health and economic and social challenges that it raises. We have regional, we have local impact of COVID-19 crisis that is highly heterogeneous with strong territorial dimension and significant implications. And I'm hoping that a lot of these small states have the crisis management and policy responses that are important for them to combat, especially possibly a second wave of COVID-19. So those are sort of my thoughts in terms of how we're looking at small and micro states when it comes to combating COVID-19 and the role that the United States possibly can play in helping to ensure COVID-19 doesn't have such a huge impact in many of these small states.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Let's try to go over now. I think you brought up a lot of interesting things there too. Iswandi Ahmed, who when he was appointed was one of the youngest parliamentarians in the world and is a member of the Brunei Legislative Council. Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for joining us, which is quite late, I know, in Brunei right now. Brunei, not a lot of money from tourism though, but oil is very important, and that's also been impacted by COVID-19.
Right. Thank you, Joseph, and Professor Doctors and Your Excellencies. It's nice again to also to meet Joseph again virtually, and also that to Matthew. And it's always nice to meet everybody. So where do I start? So Brunei Darussalam is basically essentially it's a small state in the ASEAN region, Southeast Asian region, and of course COVID-19 has in fact affected us. But then again, this is where leadership comes in strongly. So we realized when it was announced as pandemic back in March, so the whole country comes together, because being a small state, one simple mistake can turn to disastrous. And we have seen, delayed response from politicians, and this delayed response from governments has made, what we're experiencing now, second to third wave. Just to share what's happening in Brunei, we haven't seen any local transmission for the past 180 plus days, so that's almost 6 months, and that's thankful to strong leadership from the government, and also from the community. However, and as you pointed it right, that the oil has affected, and how does Brunei respond to this? This is where we are trying to reach to what we call sustainable economy. Yes, oil prices are affected. Yes, tourism is very much affected. But then again, we see the rise of e-commerce. We see the rise of people, selling things, and we do see the rise of upskilling and reskilling. So despite people are not working physically, there are those who shifted their businesses online. So we have seen people who are never ever thought of doing entrepreneurship. Suddenly they're selling their products and services online. Be it with Zoom format, with Skype format, and all. And again, this is the opportunity for us policymakers to create new jobs, to support living wages, and also to provide these social safety nets. Of course, with the reserves that we have, we managed to provide that social safety nets. However, it has always been a challenge. It has always been a challenge because the reserves are not always sustainable, so we can only cover for a few six months. But then again, we prevented the second wave. So if you look around now, and basically in Brunei, it's almost back to normal. However, the safeties, the safe operating procedures need to be there. Now, this brings back to how can we come together as a country to do this. So of course there are some mistakes that has been I'm speaking on behalf of the ASEAN region. There are countries that has made their mistakes in terms of COVID-19. We've seen countries that so engrossed in political situation, they run elections without doing proper operating procedures. We've seen the likes of like Malaysia. We've seen the likes of Philippines and Indonesia. However, the rest of the ASEAN countries are doing relatively well. And surprisingly, being a small state, I think that Matthew can vouch for this one. There's not much coverage in the news, despite quite a few are doing quite well. The ones that we always read is basically Singapore, but there are also best practices like the countries like Vietnam. Vietnam is essentially, they're almost back to normal. So this is where the opportunity for not just small states to help each other and share best practices to the world, but also for the mainstream media to cover what the small states are covering. So it's funny when we think about small states looking towards the west or looking towards the northern part of the world, for guidance on COVID-19, where essentially here we also have our best practices that can be shared on others. So I guess that's where I stop for now, and I would like to listen also where others are also having their best practices. Back to you, Joe.
Well, thank you so much. Why don't we go to Yetunde originally was discussing issues regarding in particular tourism. Matthew Youngson, who is the representative counselor for the Caribbean Asian Council. Obviously, tourism is the main industry of I would assume most Caribbean countries,
right.
Except
That's
for some of the larger ones, and also a very important industry in ASEAN as well too. So if you'd like to pick up on that or some of the other themes, that would be fantastic.
Thank you so much, Joe. And I would like to echo Iswandi's sentiments on the ASEAN as well, and best practices for the small states. As everyone knows, the Caribbean countries heavily rely on tourism for their income. And this year has been probably the worst year in the last decade or worse, since 2008. in 2008, you'd still have some sort of tourism expenditure coming from North America in general, or in Europe for that matter. But this time around, because of the travel difficulties in around the world, it's just tremendously difficult for all the Caribbean countries, whether they are as large as Jamaica or as small as Bermuda or any of the overseas territories of France and the Dutch territories. So all of them rely on heavily on cruise ships, all of which emanate from Florida, and all of whom are basically stuck anywhere in the world, not just in the US. Some of them are actually parked in the UK. So that alone has set back many of these small island developing states, the small island states, at least 5 to 10 years in terms of how their economies will regain the big loss. There has been some creative ways to mitigate this loss. Some have started off with long-term residency visas, such as countries like the Cayman Islands, who are now offering a stay for remote workers for up to 2 years. Antigua and Barbuda just rolled out a new residency program that will allow people to work from there for up to 2 years. Aruba also does the same for 90 days. You can live and work. Bermuda did that as well, where they're now also allowing students to actually study in Bermuda and live for a year. Other small states like Mauritius have done something similar to that effect. But these are just stopgap measures for essentially a big loss in income coming from the tourism industry. And there is no projection as to when these countries will regain all of that. This is the same sentiments that South Pacific nations like Dr. Yatende mentioned earlier, Vanuatu, Tonga, and many other small island states in the South Pacific are experiencing, as they also would have some sort of tourism income coming from Australia and New Zealand. Though New Zealand has started to create its own bubble with many of its neighboring islands, like the Cook Islands, for example, which also heavily relies on tourism coming from New Zealand and Australia and Europe for that matter. So many of the countries, small islands across the globe, have just been tremendously impacted by the COVID-19. Though, particularly, many of them do not experience the effects of the pandemic itself locally. Though there has been isolated cases, like, say, for example, St. Lucia has its first death from COVID-19 just the other day, whereas some other countries in the South Pacific have never had any case of COVID-19 or any death-related incident. So it is really an economic problem for the small island states and how they would survive post the pandemic, whether there be a vaccine, and how the U.S. as a country, North America in general, which directly impacts the economies of the Caribbean countries because of the tourism expenditure. As you know, most of the visitors coming from North America going to the Caribbean or from the U.S. And with all of the cruise ships not coming over, they are expecting at least 5 to 7 years before these countries regain what they had in 2019.
Fantastic. We'll go now over to Tembiak Julius, offer his thoughts, who's coming to us from Cameroon. Obviously, we have a member of parliament from Brunei. We have people, I'm in London. We have people, Youngstown is in the Philippines. We have many people from New York. And obviously, we heard from a member of parliament earlier from Africa as well. But Tembiak, maybe you can pick up on some of those themes that other people have mentioned. You obviously have experience with a very unique organization, the Africa, Caribbean, Pacific Island organization, which links those three regions together, and indeed some of the issues we've been talking about. So perhaps you can pick up there. You're on mute. You're on mute, by the way. Technical issues. There we go.
Thank you, everyone. Greetings to everyone, and thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for the speakers. The inputs have been very great. Now, like the other speakers, they've talked about some points. They've highlighted some major points like everyone is always thinking like small states, they need to rely on international institutions and on international organizations, other major powers to to be self-sustainable. But I will not be coming from that angle. Looking at the COVID and what the COVID has done, we see it, we've seen it, and we know that we need to wake up. So I will try now to highlight from what I know and from experience. I will try to highlight some of the points that I think it's very important and essential for small states to take into consideration this period. It's still not late, even with the fact that the COVID is trying to get back to a different level in most countries. But I think we still have time, and it's still time that many things can be put in place to adjust a lot of things now and things that will help small states in future. Firstly, I would like to talk about the ability to diversify economic activity and to cope with external economic impacts, such as trade regimes. If small states they can take into considerations and they put in place measures how they can diversify the economic activities and to look and also put mechanisms that will always be ready with external economic impacts like trade regimes that they do come and they change with different norms, and also given the way situations and stocks, things like stocks and other things, they rise and they fall, the oscillations. I think it will be of great value to them, not just for them to be reliable or to rely on others for them to grow. There is potential. Each small state has its own problems, and when you put a lot of small states together, you will discover that they do have unique problems, and thus we need unique solutions that can be designed to see how we can help the situation. Also, we can talk about the improvement in their public and private sector capacity. If now both the public and the private sectors in small states, they can work closely. And while they are working closely, economic planners in these states, if they can also try to draft and they are putting heads together to see that they can produce policies that will work not only now, but policies that will also help them in future. Today, we are with COVID. We don't know what next tomorrow. And majority of small states, they are also in regions that are prone with, are liable with environmental impact or impacts such as natural disasters. So I believe if they can work together at the moment to see how these policies can be put in place, policies that are sustainable, then I think it will go a long way to help them. Also, most of them they have this aspect of trying to deal with colonial laws and the customary laws to see how indigenous people they can cope. I believe culture is something that is very important in the different states and in wherever we are. So if they can try to work and integrate colonial laws and customary laws of the indigenous people, then it will also be something. Now there is COVID. We are trying to see how some people in some countries they believe it's a myth. Some people believe that they can use one or two maybe natural ways to try to prevent it or stuff like that. And now, while looking at the health sector, at the medical sector in the different countries, you working in collaboration with WHO, they are also coming out with measures. But looking at it now, some people with their own customary laws, they may look at some of the things like, no, if we do contrary to this or if we do this way, we can have our own way. So if we can try to integrate a lot of colonial and customary laws, then I believe it will be helpful to the ingenious people and it will further promote a lot of things in the economy, because if these things are not taken into consideration, proper health issues are not taken into consideration, it will come with a lot of problems like workforce and other things, which can be detrimental to the country. And last but not the least, that I would like to say is, if there can be an emergency response unit set up by the countries. We know most of them, they are having financial issues. They face a lot of financial problems, constraints because of a lot of things to be done. But now we know a lot of international organizations, they'll always like to help, and maybe the countries too can come in case of emergency. So with that, if they can always put in place emergency response units and plans, then I think it will go a long way to help and also mitigate the aspect of them relying, or people looking at small states like they need to rely on others. Though we know totally they cannot do on their own, but I think it will go a long way to help. Thank you.
Fantastic. Let's go back over to Iswandi Ahmed, who I thought had a very interesting point. He was talking about, small states, and one of the issues they face is, well, if you take a country like the United States can make a lot of mistakes because it's a big country, it has, a big GDP, and we've made certainly plenty of them. The Vietnam War, the Iraq War, take your pick. But for small states, they really kind of have to get something like COVID right the first time because they're not going to get a second chance. Because the U.S. definitely didn't get COVID right the first time, and we can. But for small states, they kind of have to, right? There's very little margin for error. But that's a very interesting idea. I'm not sure how that if anyone wants to speak to that in regards to resiliency, but I thought maybe Iswandi Ahmed, you could expand on that a little bit.
Right. Thank you, Joe, on that one. Again, this it is an interesting thought on that, and because we read in newspapers, and we well, at least if you don't have cable TV, you follow on what's happening on YouTube. So when the news of the election, it was a confusing 4 days for all of us because we were waiting for the result at the time, and basically people were like on the edge. Who's the next president of the United States? And this has created an opportunity to learn best practices. A few of the panelists just now talked about the adoption of technology, shifting towards online, and also the policy guides on this one. And I guess this is where we need to. I think Tembek mentioned also just now. This is where we need to focus our information. We need to focus the uncertainties that we have to invest more in information on this one. Again, when COVID came towards in this part of the world, especially and when it was informed as a pandemic, no one knows what to do. We were relying on the WHO, whatever the guidance was at that time. And to be fair, the guidance was limited. Guidance was, it was scattered, and it changes all the time. But then again, the best information that we had at that time, we did. So the first thing that most countries did this was to close the borders. Apparently, not all countries are willing to do that because of other reasons. So this is where policymakers we're fighting over: do we balance out health, economy, or do we balance out on the responding to the pandemic? But at that time, you won't have an economy if the whole community just collapsed on that one. So at that time, the most important ones was just to take care of the health and then the community of the society. So this is where strong leadership needs to come. And again, you cannot compare small states to big countries like the United States or the UK for this matter. However, strong leadership can happen in all parts of the world, be it you're a small state, be it you're a big state. So we always look forward to the Western world on guidance. We always look towards Germany for their technological engineering expertise. We always look towards the Caribbean countries for their expertise in tourism. We are jealous to what they have on that one. All the blue waters and then the clear skies that they have. Why aren't we doing that on this one? So again, this is where I always mention about strong leadership. And also, at the same time, the distrust with the government needs to be toned down not by trusting your government, but with fact checking. We were talking about disinformation yesterday. I was reading the excerpt on that one, and again, the disinformation can be tackled by fact checking. So there was an interesting discussion prior to this discussion on this one. Why are people attracted to fake news? While you can check you can verify the eligibility of the news by just checking on the YouTube and cross-checking with other information. So why does that not happening? I guess the lack of knowledge on information needs to be challenged by education on information itself. So education is not just limited to academics that we have. It's not just limited to the news that we have, but also on how to read the news and how to interpret it. So at that time, you look at towards authority to handle COVID-19, and at that time we rely on that, and we managed to control COVID-19, especially on Brunei one. Thank you.
Yetunde, I'm conscious that you'll have to, leave here shortly, given to scheduling issues. But there's a lot to pick up there. What the other panelists have said, and since we started with you, I thought maybe you'd like to come back and reflect on those things. I do want to say I did like what Aswandi Ahmed was talking about how small states can be labs to try out policies, and there are labs around the world trying out different policies, and were very important in coming up with solutions to COVID.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that they are, of course, suitable for best practices. And I think even just having the small states council in terms of just going back and forth with one another and what has worked in your area, what is not working in another area. So it's almost like a best practice database. And this best practice database can also be extrapolated to even larger states. I mean, learning doesn't stop, right? So there may be things that they're doing in their tourism parts, right, that may help New York, or that may help other places, regardless of just the population size, but in just how the implementation of policy and just sort of maybe a forward or progressive thinking on how do you balance these things out. And I think it's the same thing even here in the United States, right? So you don't, the trade-off, right, is, okay, you want to keep the economy open, but keeping the economy open, does that mean we are putting the health of people at risk, right? But if we don't keep the economy open, how do we generate money to ensure that we have financial resources to pay for this, or to provide a mask, or all of these other things that may come from having an open economy, right? So you have those people who are advocating that we shouldn't shut down. A country shouldn't shut down. We need the money. People need to go to work. People need to fend for themselves. But then at the same time well, if you don't have a healthy population, you can't have a running economy, because an economy is not run by machines, right? They're not run by robots. They're run by healthy individuals, or individuals who are able-bodied to be able to work.
At least robots not yet, yeah.
Huh?
At least robots not yet.
I mean, we have some robots taking over. Right. So we have the AI scene, but still, so it's those two things that are sometimes at the end of the spectrum, but they work hand in hand, and it's very hard to separate the two, the economy and a healthy society. It's quite difficult, and if one doesn't work, it actually impacts the other. And I think that's what COVID-19 has basically shown us, right? That when things shut down, right? When you no longer have the free flowing of resources from people who work and provide these free flowing sources of income and economic sort of, prosperity, what does then a country look like? How do they then function? And so we're at sort of that crossroads. Well, can we balance the two? And it's very difficult to balance the two. It is very difficult to balance the two, but you're seeing that they're taking some progressive measures in terms of timing of when people can go to work, people can work from home from school, if jobs are open, there's certain time frames that they have to be open, because they realize that, look, we need the economy to run, right? But we also need healthy individuals. We don't want to put them at risk. And it's not that we're putting money first, but we realize that money is also the utilization of a resource to provide the medicine, the labs, the testing, the clinics, all of these things that are needed to keep the population going. So it's certain things that you can't really trade off, that we're trying to really find a balance. But I think in a lot of these small states, there are some really best practices that can be taken from there, that can be applied to bigger countries that also are areas of tourism destination. And also have other areas where there's some form of synchrony or some form of overlap. So I think we need to look at it from that angle, and not necessarily always look at it like, I think it's Tembiek said, from the angle of small states always being heavily dependent on international financial institutions, or looking to more developed countries for their take or their leadership, when a lot of these small states are actually very successful in their own right, also have very great economic output as well. And they are also leading the change and sort of leading, I would say, the COVID-19 recovery package in a progressive way that can teach other countries. So I sort of, anchor and also agree with a lot of the comments that have been made when it comes to small states.
That's fantastic. I think now, we talked a lot about economics. Let's go back to Matthew, to get his comments on that. And then I want to come to Tembiek, because Tembiek, you've worked a lot with youth organizations. And what is the youth of the small states? If you're a young person you enter the job market in a Vanuatu, in a Brunei, in a Malta, and right this year, how is that going to impact? And how is that also going to impact youth going forward? But first, let's go to Matthew for his thoughts on the economics, and then or on that. Back to Tembiek.
Okay, thanks so much, Joe. In general, I think the global economy is going to take a big hit, but more so for the small island states or small states in general. And as the other speakers have mentioned, they look towards the larger countries in terms of helping them out in times like these. But there's also a big factor that despite all the best practices and how they overcame, or they're overcoming, or at least trying to overcome the effects of the pandemic in terms of mitigating the risks that they have locally, it's the parts of the economic impact that they can't do without. Debt relief, for one, is very important for the small states. The IMF still refuses to classify many of these Caribbean countries, for example, in helping them out, especially during this pandemic. So that is a difficulty that many of these small states are experiencing now. Especially, there is no income coming from anywhere. We have seen, in my experience, they have seen move towards online. But when you are relying on your biggest income is tourism, where there's people factor, whatever technology can bring, you can't really bring them physically to these small countries. There has been some innovation in that area. I've seen some countries bring in virtual reality, but that's just some innovation.
That's a gimmick really, that won't last for long,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it is going to be difficult. And unless the ships start coming in, more planes are coming in, travelers are coming in, it's going to be another 2021 that's just going to be just like 2020, despite them having zero casualties or zero effects of COVID-19.
That's fun. Thank you for that insight. You're right. I don't know. We've seen these virtual things. Very interesting. Museums have done them, not just small states. But I think people it's something you can do once, but it's hard to make a sustainable industry out of that, right? But let's go back to Tembiek for the kind of the youth perspective on this. And what do you think the lessons for the youth of small states should be, and how small states, because they have very limited human resources, so they really have to ensure that each of their citizens will get the highest economic potential.
Okay, thank you. What I can say is I believe this period, the COVID period, it has really made a lot of youth they have gone back to the thinking table. This I can say for sure, because I've been on many virtual meetings with youths from different small states. And if you look at it now like this, most of the meetings, the virtual meetings, they are being organized and being taken by youth from these small states or low and medium income countries. Lots of them, they are trying to network. They are trying to network with the youths from different countries, different organizations, and now they are trying to put up innovative solutions to different problems. And I look at it from an angle that if these youths, if they can push forward, and if only they can make these things come to a reality, then I think in these COVID times, there will be not just tears of people dying, but I believe it's another way that has made a lot of youth, they are now really like thinking more sustainable. They are thinking in a more sustainable way as to how they can really attract or bring in economic issues that will not only better their lives, but also better the lives of of their economy. Because if, like most scholars, they'll always say with small states, there's the importance for them to form alliance with larger states. I think this is what actually the youth of most small states, they are doing now. I think they are on the right footing, and most of them, they are really looking that shelter. They are really looking at that shelter, that societal shelter, will not only where they belong, but looking at the world as a globalized, and the world as oneness, as a place where they can also get the shelter, not just the shelter from where they are as home, like in their countries, but trying to harness the potentials of others in the world.
I think that's a very good point. I'd love to open this up a little bit more at this point, to questions from the floor and to a more broader discussion. I think one of the things, here's some things I picked up on. We can go back to. Iswandi Ahmed was talking about sovereign wealth funds, basically the fact that Brunei had been able to accumulate sufficient reserves so that it was prepared for a rainy day. I don't think many small states have done that. I'm sure Youngson and others can, agree, but they should have been, right? Because, they should have looked at tourism the same way that Brunei looked at the oil and gas, right? That it's a extractive industry, really. And it's only really booming when things are going well in other parts of the world. So you need to be able to create those rainy day funds. Why didn't they, I think, is an interesting question, or how could they? I also, if anyone had any thoughts, I thought it was very interesting. Youngson's idea point earlier about a lot of these small states allowing 1-year residency or 3-month residency, where people could come. That's a kind of an interesting idea. I'm not really sure if that could be expandable, but perhaps some other people have some thoughts on some of the other solutions to the situations these states find themselves in now. Any comments on the floor? Yeah, go. Yeah, Shanna. Yeah.
Let me just start by saying that what a brilliant conversation going on. And I'm particularly interested in the area where Iswandi talked about the fact that nobody talks about the best practices that are succeeding in these small states. And it's a further continuation of the disregard, or should I say lack of attention, to small states by larger states. We may know all the reasons why they're happening, but why I'm going to concentrate on the media issue is because if you don't say here I am, nobody say where are you. And Iswandi, being in government, are there pragmatic measures taken by the government in your area or perhaps other small states in getting their word out? Because if you ask me, when I had this conversation with Joseph, one of the reasons why we thought it would be nice to have this conversation is part of the attempt to really, add your voice to global conversation. And we are committed to doing that even beyond this particular forum, because we recognize that even at the UN, that occurs every year when we come to UN on September for the General Assembly and all that. Hardly does anybody hear about all these small states, but we're even thinking about having a parallel session or session really where small states will also be expressing their opinion. So my question is, beyond these little baby steps we are making to get their word out, I'm actually frustrated that it's not just even in some small states. I also know that somewhere in Madagascar, for example, whether it's true or not, I had stories that they even had some very prophylactic medicine that could control this coronavirus, but nobody's talking about it. We are waiting for Pfizer and all the big things to come and go through the lab and all that. Whereas there may be some, effective medication, that that exists somewhere, either in some of these small states, but nobody's talking about that. So my question is, are there measures that you have thought about or that you're ready to put in place to get out your word out from those small environments, perhaps getting to reach out to CNN, all these major news outlets, to talk about it? Because if you don't say, here I am, nobody's going to ask, where are you? We know all the imbalances, and we know the pervasive inequality that exists around the world. And part of it is also affecting not just media coverage, but also in global policy agenda. So that's my question. So if you have not thought about that, you may begin to think about developing serious campaign measures, media campaign to really talk about that. This coronavirus could be an opening for you guys. That's my opinion. So I would like to know, or other members of the panel who may want to share some thoughts on this.
Indeed. Thank you, Dr. Uchenna, on that one. Perhaps I'll just give some insights on it. I remember a few years ago, I was approached by, I can't remember which news agency, but she was based in Hong Kong. And at that time, she was asking a question, would you like to be interviewed on the Sharia law that we just launched at that time? And she was very specific with the question that it was a leading question that is basically condemning rather than just to understand the whole situation, what's happening on that one. So again, we have to understand that these media bias has always been there, and not that the small state has never released, what's the real news. But at the end of the day, if for a newspaper to sell, for a news outlet to sell, there needs to be news. If it's just like, for example, like if I were to give example, Brunei 6 months without coronavirus, it doesn't sell well. But if we say that half of Brunei got coronavirus, so at the time, what is news that what the public or the readers wants to read, what the viewers wants to see, it has. And the funny thing is, if you were to Google about small states, there's always a a predetermined image about that country that has always been showcased in the internet. So for example, if you were to Google like Bali, Indonesia, it's always about tourism, but people don't talk about the culture. People don't talk about, where it's basically people are just respectful of each other, but that's never reflected in the news. And I agree with that. Where there should be the correspondent of these news agency needs to come down and understand the whole news in the scene itself, not just relying on reports by another reporting agency, and just reflecting it on the newspaper. And sometimes which comes to my second point, I guess small states, we always joke about it, we were too busy handling the real issue that we forgot to focus on the news issue matter. You're focusing a lot on the substantive rather than on the marketing side of it. You'd rather be safe, or you rather focus on your economy, or rather develop the society. And if you got on the media side of it, and I think that's also a learning practice that we can learn from other countries that is more news savvy, and we also. And I believe that that's something that we can work together on that one. Like for example, like we just released a United Nations voluntary national review on sustainable development goals. No one knows about it, despite it was shared in the United Nations, despite it was a international publication shared in the UN website. Again, how can you compete with a country that's like China, or a country like the United Kingdom when they publish their own report on that one? So I was looking at a recent report by the World Economic Forum. There was nothing on Brunei there, despite we submit our reports every year towards them. So again, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we're just being overlooked as small states by these agencies, and I don't know where the mistakes come from on that one.
Fantastic.
Actually, the truth is that I share your concerns.
I want to really quickly, because in the interest of time, I want to give Dr. Yetunde a chance to make a final comment before she has to go to another engagement.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, talking about media bias, the interesting thing is that I did study journalism and media studies as an undergrad, and then went on to pursue global affairs. But we know in terms of the media does do agenda setting, right? So the media creates the agenda of what should be discussed to form public opinion, oftentimes forming perceptions, manipulations, trying to change convictions, regardless of sometimes whether it's positive or negative, acceptable or rejected, beneficial or harmful, loved or hated, right? And we also have to understand that the media now is owned by a lot of big corporations, right, who also have their own interests that oftentimes have undue influence and possibly may have undue bias on the media. But with that being said, we also do have to understand that the role of journalism still exists, right? Where people are actually doing the work and fact checking and trying to put out the stories that matter the most in the most objective way. Yes, we have entertainment news. Yes, we have subjective media. And if you are not, I would say, knowledgeable about the fact that media can take different avenues, right, and can have different agenda settings, you may be listening to one media and assuming that this is 100% fact. This is 100% the way that the world of journalism works, and not understanding that it may just be an entertainment media and saying certain things to garner more ratings and to garner more people to watch it, therefore having some form of a different sort of undue influence. And with that being said, there has been a lot of arguments that says that the media is politicizing COVID-19 and that the media is doing agenda setting, that the media is also trying to achieve certain ideological bents. Well, at the same time, some of it may be true and some of it may be wrong. But I think in the avenues that we are in now is that a lot of people are at the intersection is, do I believe the media or not? Can the media be trusted or not? Is the media left or is it right? I mean, there's no balance when it comes to the media of what people are seeing and what they are talking about and some of the arguments that they're raising. And a lot of the news networks have their own leanings, and that's very, very clear. But at the same time, there are people who are looking to find objective media and to find the facts. And facts are still important in this day and age. As much as entertainment is important, as much as having media that sort of wants people to tune in, we still need to have factual data that's important to cross-check. This has a lot to do with the health of a nation. It has a lot to do with public policy. It has a lot to do with steering the public in the right direction. And so you have different people who have formulated a lot of their judgments and a lot of their opinions from the media, and not necessarily some of the media that has been fact-checked, not necessarily some of the media that is objective, but we all choose the media that we want to basically have influence on us, right? So we purposely click a certain channel, we purposely hear a podcast, we purposely go to certain avenues because it speaks to our interests, right? And for others, they may want to learn what is the interest of what other people have, right? But at the same time, we really have to be cognizant and understand that, look, media can sometimes manipulate and it can sometimes distort, but at the same time, we cannot group all media under that one umbrella. We end up doing ourselves a disservice because the role of true journalism still exists and it's still alive. And media does inform us about the daily activities and the information that we need to make healthy decisions in our lives on a daily basis. So we have to find that balance as individuals within ourselves when it comes to media that we are also sort of taking in when it comes to world media and global media. Here in the United States, most of our media, of course, have been inundated with what is going on here in the United States. So unless you tune out to BBC, Al Jazeera, and other media networks to get a world view of what's going on around the world, we may not hear what are some of the best practices that small states are having to combat COVID-19, right? We may not hear what some of the issues of COVID-19 in other self-governing, non-governing, self-governing countries. We may not hear a lot of the things that we are discussing today. So that's why it's important for a lot of us to try to find that balance in the media that we see, and also to keep an open mind when it comes to trying to get information that is not only just based in the US, but also to figure out COVID-19 is a global pandemic, right? So yes, it affects us here, but how does our role here in the United States in battling COVID-19, what impact does it have on other countries and small states and vice versa? We live in a global community where we do have to understand and know what is going around the world. And so for me, those are just some of my takes on the media and sometimes media bias and where the media is today.
Thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for joining us. I know you have your engagement. Fantastic, yes. Fantastic. We hope to have you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
All right, we have a question now. First of all, let me also recognize the Dean, Charles Manyfield. Thank you so much for joining us, sir, at this discussion. We've been talking about geopolitical realities after COVID-19 and some of the issues of small states, what we can learn. Talked about economics, talked about the youth angle, financial angle as well. Thank you so much for joining us. We also have if you'd like to say anything.
I'd like to just echo sorry.
Go ahead, yeah. Oh no.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm happy to be here.
Okay, fantastic. So we have a question now from Lizzie in Australia, who wants to know why youth protests during COVID-19 occurred and how that spread the virus. A little bit, tangential to our topic, but we were talking about the youth earlier, so we'll go back to Tembiek on that, right? We saw for months, or for long periods of time, people were locked up, they were in lockdown, and then we saw these explosion of these, youth protests, much linked to George Floyd, but also other, contexts that we've seen around the world. I mean, in the last month, we've seen some protests in Peru tied to what's going on there with the parliamentary, situation. We've had some protests in Thailand. But do you have a comment on youth protests and their link to COVID-19 from Lizzie?
Okay. Can I go on?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to, first of all, I highlight this point to make it clear that the youth protests that has been going on in different parts of the world during this COVID period, it's not something that happens just because of the COVID. It's a sort of accumulated stuff, accumulated social issues that had been there. There are issues that had been there since before the COVID pandemic. But during this COVID period, it has given room for a lot of people to be thinking, to have a thought about a lot of different things. And now using social media, especially the social media technology, with the help of technology through social media, it has helped to enhance the protest, and it has helped for people to strategize and to bring out different methodologies that they can approach the different governments. Because if you look at the protests like that in the US and that in Nigeria, for example, they are totally two. They were handled in two different ways, because of the different types of governments that we have. Now you see the escalations, the rate of escalations, and the rate at which they were being handled. It's some sort of how the youth they conceived how they saw the different government, and now they had to take it now. And I would like to let you know that things like with the Nigeria, let me give an example, like with the protests in Nigeria, the NSAS in Nigeria, it is something that the youth, first of all, they took it on media with the hashtag NSAS, but it yielded nothing. So they had to now go on a peaceful protest to the street. Now using the social media influencers, the artists, the actors, the actresses of Nigeria, and other musicians. Now they had to go on a peaceful protest. Before now, the government handled it in a way that it was not really good to the youth, and now you saw it coming to the level at which it was that some people were killed, and it turns like that. So the youths, they have been on the thinking table, and the protest is not only for the youth, or it's not only the youths that have fueled the different protests, because if it was only for the youth, you wouldn't have been seeing other people, family people, but they are also mothers, parents who are going out because they fear for the life of their children, even the younger children, and they also want to make these changes to be known. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I think we'll give another round of questions here before we wrap up. And I really appreciate all of you for your time. Iswandi Ahmed, I know it's getting quite late there in Brunei. So if you have a final thought for us, we'd love to hear from you again. But either way, I think we'll wrap up here in about 10 minutes.
Thank you, John. This one, yes, it is actually 1 o'clock in Brunei now.
Whoa, okay.
Well, I guess it's also the same with
same for Youngstown in Philippines, yes.
So good morning again, Matthew.
Good morning now, yes.
But nonetheless, thank you. The reason why I agree to this one, Joseph, is because this creates an opportunity for people to understand what's happening on this side of the world. Because I agree with Dr. Yutsen, they mentioned just now. Sometimes when you're engrossed with only one aspect of the media, you only rely on one source on that one. And I hope with the short sharing that we shared here is it gives an not an insight, at least an overview what's happening in this part of the world. Of course, no country is perfect, no place is perfect. We also have our struggles. But again, quoting, the VUCA method, VUCA concept about uncertainty, the U part. This is where we need to invest information. The more we understand about each other, the more we can learn the best practices. We talk about best practices a lot, but we also create opportunity to understand each other on this one. Sometimes some things are not read on the news, but some you know what they say, the best how I miss being a tourist now. The best way to understand a country is not to go to the tourist area, but rather find a local friend and go around there on that one. So I hope with this we create more understanding with about how small states are dealing with it. And if I can just add on Tembek's information about a youth protest there. So usually when youth protests or protest comes in, this is where there's limited avenue for expression, where very avenue for expression were very limited. But before it happens on that one, there needs to be some channel of communication. Channel communication needs to be effective, it needs to be open, it needs to be transparent. When the channel is there earlier, then the protest shouldn't happen, because people are communicating, people are talking, people are engaging. That's the reason why we have town halls. There's the reason why we have forums. There's the reason why you meet with your constituencies, representatives. So I hope this can create an avenue, and I would like to say thank you to everyone, and especially to Joseph to bring on this one. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, you're I think we'll maybe have a couple more things, but thank you so much. You're free to go. We really appreciated you joining us. You've definitely been to some of the non-touristy parts of the UK. I can attest to that. Along with Matthew Youngson, we've been to some very interesting places in East London that I don't even remember the name of. But that really is, in all seriousness, that really is a great way to learn a country. I mean, to be honest with you, sometimes it can be overwhelming if you go to a Paris or a New York, where there's 20 famous things, and you feel like, oh, I got to see this museum and go see this statue and da-da-da. And often, when you go to some random small town, in let's say, I don't know, West Virginia, and you see the differences between your country and the way, the Coke bottles are presented, small differences like that, you can really get that sense of being a foreigner, first of all, because there's not tourists outnumbered and everybody taking a picture, but also you start to notice those subtle small differences that I think really separate tourism from being a traveler. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And I also definitely want to go to Dr. Saja.
Sorry, before Iswandi leaves, I just wanted to thank you for sacrificing your time. You see, we are talking about some of the disadvantages of COVID, but I also see some good sides to it. For example, this is the first time we're having this conference, virtually. Most times we've had it in person for the past 8 years or 9 years, rather. So I'm sure that if it was an in-person event, it would have been difficult for you to fly all the way from there to America, right? Just like I can see someone from New Zealand and Australia, within the chat. So those are people who have found it difficult to even come here. There are other people from, I see some people calling from Nigeria. So the advantage I'm saying is that technology is also helpful, that we're able to bring everybody together, So even some other speakers yesterday also joined. Perhaps they wouldn't have been able to join if not because of COVID. They now made us have virtual setting. So please send our regards to the government of your country, and we do hope to continue to advocate on your behalf. So over to you, Joseph. And I will hope that the Dean will make some remarks at the end of it, so when we wrap up. So
I think
has any questions, I believe, or comments, we can share that.
Yeah, I think we're going to final closing remarks, unless there's any burning questions. But again, Dr. Saja Youngson, again, in Manila, it is quite early in the morning there as well. Same time zone as Brunei, I think.
Right, that's right.
Okay,
yeah.
Fair enough.
So just a few sentiments that I would like to mention about what Dr. Itende mentioned earlier, as well as Wandi. about how the news and media play a big role during this COVID-19. One of the things that we have experienced as part of the Caribbean ASEAN Council is that the heavy reliance of the small states in the Caribbean to a country called Cuba. Cuba is one of the biggest exports of Cuba in the region of the Caribbean is actually medical support. They were the first responders for many of the small islands in the Caribbean during hurricanes or typhoons or storms, and also during this pandemic. In fact, you don't normally see in the news that Cuba has actually been has already been doing their test trials for their own vaccine since early October. But of course, with Cuba's own position in global politics, you won't really hear that much on the news. Uh, Also, on the news part, two small states that are actually playing a big role in global politics are actually during this 2020 have been, I should say, not being noticed on the news as much as they should have. Saint Vincent and the Grenadines is currently the president of the UN Security Council, and not too many people know about that. So on top of that, Guyana is also the chairman for the G77. These small states, especially for Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, which is being the only country that is part of the UN Security Council, or the president has been president of the Security Council, that is a small state, and it is very vital, especially during COVID-19, that they have a voice in this pandemic, and those two roles alone gives that value without much media hype or information for that matter. I think many people even know about it. So that being said, this is actually a good year for the small states, and as Wandy's mentioned, the best practices that these small countries provide to the larger countries, and it's all about integration and learning from each other. Like what many of the other speakers mentioned, like Swandi mentioned, culture plays a big role. Joseph mentioned that. I have been to 20 out of the 34 island countries in the Caribbean, and each and every country that I have visited to, each and every island that I visited to, is very unique. It's very different. The difference between Antigua and Barbuda and Dominica and Saint Lucia and the overseas territories of the U.S. Virgin Islands is very different from the British Virgin Islands or Bermuda for that matter. So all of this is culturally affecting how we learn from each other during this pandemic, not just as states in general, but as global citizens in general. So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll go for the final comment from Tembiek for his final statement.
Okay, thank you all. I would like to say this pandemic, the COVID pandemic, we should not only look at it from the standpoint that people always think like it has kept us in the houses. A lot of us, we are just indoors. But I would say it's a time for us to reflect, for the world to reflect a lot, because there are a lot of challenges that are ahead of us, but we cannot see. Example, the COVID has come and it has made us to know that education, the one we used to know, it can also be looked from a different angle. And most countries, they never had the facility or the infrastructures, they never put in place modalities that they could study. Distance learning could be accessible to a majority of the citizens. But now we've seen the need for it, for services to respond to emergency. We've seen the need for us to think, about things that they can be innovative and they can help us in future, even if they are not needed at the moment. And it's time for our policy makers, for our economic planners to work together with the private sector. Let the public-private partnership be enhanced in most countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Let's go for a final statement from Charles Menefield. If you have a comment for the panel.
I haven't been on very long, but I can tell that these presentations were of high quality, just like they were yesterday. It amazes me how Uchenna is able to get the quality of speakers for these presentations is unbelievable, to say the least. One of the positives to COVID, if there are a few, is that we are able to reach people from around the world. And I'm so happy to see that we have someone from Brunei, there's one day, I can't remember where you're from, Singapore maybe?
We have people on this call today from in Cameroon, Youngson's in the Philippines, and Eswandi is in Brunei. So we have people from all around the world today. I'm in London.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's fantastic. It's I mean, powerful conversations from powerful people. Thank you.
All right. Bob, you want to say something, Bob?
No, well, let me just unmute myself.
You're already unmuted.
Yeah, unmuted.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Thanks. I was really impressed by the smaller countries and how they are controlling COVID. We didn't get into a lot of detail about that, but obviously here in the United States and in countries in Western Europe are having real problems in being able to control the virus. And here we have these small countries who are controlling the virus, and maybe it's another conversation of how they were able to do that, where we have been terribly struggling about that. But I was impressed with that and impressed with the presenters.
Thank you so much. We also have the other guys from Brussels, and you're from Cameroon, Timberg, right? But you're currently in Cameroon and Brussels?
I'm currently in Cameroon.
All right. And of course, Edmond, thank you so much. Robert Branson, you want to say a few words before we wrap it up?
Hey, thank you. I thought the presentations were excellent as always. And living in New York, but working closely with the Caribbean, Matthew's points were very well taken. I also wanted to make some other points that I have heard about in the last few days. I don't know if you're aware of it, but there is a cruise ship that is now in quarantine in Barbados. I don't know if anybody's heard. An organization that is a travel planning organization at the high end sent out a cruise ship with a very strong list of procedures to follow. People were tested before, while on the ship, et cetera, et cetera. And now that ship has one person who is infected, and thus everybody is now quarantined on the ship. And they now believe that perhaps they should have had mask regulations while those people were on the ship. They didn't believe that they needed them because it was a closed environment. So that is something that came up today. I've also been seeing a lot of offers of citizenship from a lot of these Caribbean nations to kind of raise funds. So I believe it was, maybe it was St. Vincent, but I'm not completely sure. I do remember seeing an ad in one of the international papers where they were offering this, which is something that they don't generally go out and chase people to do.
St. Lucia.
There you go, sorry. I also thought I found something interesting in this morning's Wall Street Journal. Deutsche Bank is now proposing that people who work from home have a special income tax added to their earnings to provide for people who are forced to go in. It's something they're floating in a study they did. So it's a possibility that there is going to be some action on that. As far as Mr. Iswandi, you know, when you mentioned about going off the beaten path to countries and really learning the countries, that is one of the things I did when I made my last trip to Jamaica. I was there for almost a month, and I had a driver in a car, and I visited every parish in Jamaica except for one, and saw some beautiful sights. And when people ask me, what's your favorite place in Jamaica, I don't say Mo Bay or some beach. I say, you know, Port Royal is very beautiful, of course, but the site where they had the slave revolt, which is one of the most, Moron Bay, which is probably one of the most beautiful sites you could see, but it's off the beaten path. And I think that one of the things I remember greatest is, if you remember Anthony Bourdain, who he had his recent and untimely passing, he was really good on that. You could see that program on a Sunday night, and he would go into a country and really scratch the surface. I mean, Indonesia's been on my travel list for many years. But the fact that he went into Indonesia and he was able to talk to people about the culture, particularly the, I forget the title, was the puppet dancing and the importance of the puppet dancing in the culture. He would go and check the foods. Vietnam, clearly, you know, when he did that program with Obama. So I think those are the types of programs that really draw people. The unfortunate part I was going to say is, and I don't want to pontificate on this, is we've at a point now where education is really not looked upon with a lot of regard. We've got a lot of folks out here who don't really trust in education. And once we have education devalued, there's less interest in scratching below the surface in world news, and people are not going to Al Jazeera. I work very closely with a couple of African folks who worked in Al Jazeera in New York here, and I was always told, well, what are you listening to those people for? That's Muslim news. That doesn't really affect us here in the States. And eventually, as you know, Al Jazeera retreated from the United States. They closed their New York bureau, and basically the only access is through their website. But I think that the fact that education is devalued is certainly part of it. I remember being in a hotel in Jamaica on another trip, and people were saying to me, what are you doing here? And he said, you have a lot of equipment. I said, well, I'm here to photograph and film. And the guy goes, oh. I said, what are you doing here? He goes, well, we're going to hang out at the beach and chill, and then maybe go out and find a place to enjoy later. So I think, that's a problem. We have to really look at a lot of these things. Now, there's one question I did want to ask, and that was this. Oil, we realize oil is going to become less and less of a major resource for many countries. And as it becomes more scarce, nations are going to probably have to adapt. My concern is when the nations have to adapt, we hopefully won't have COVID, because these are the types of issues that can magnify those economic problems. I would like to direct my question to Mr. Aswandi. Do you believe that nations are going to have to make moves? I know the Gulf is, but other nations which really rely on it, such as Nigeria and in your country, really look on it. So what are the plans to vary the economy and adapt? And also, do you believe that something like COVID could cause an extra problem and added burden when they're doing adapting?
Right. Thank you, Robert, on that one. Maybe just a quick one, Joseph, if I'm allowed to do this one.
Oh, please, yeah.
I'm sorry.
No worries. I guess COVID has created problems. COVID has created, basically sufferings, if I can use the words on that one. But it has also created opportunities. So, for example, in Brunei, we understand that oil and gas will, it's a finite resources. But again, we're always playing around what's our next step for economy. And again, tourism is not really a big part of it yet, because basically you're competing with countries like Thailand, Indonesia, who's very mature in the tourism sector. However, there's something that we are strong on, which is our education. Basically, we have a big number of people entering postgraduate education even on this one, and this is where the country is heading towards digital economy. Digital economy is the way to go. Because when you look about COVID, it has created a digital economy opportunity for everyone. For example, we were talking about like how we can attend this program online, despite we are having different time differences. And we're also looking at, if I were to give example, like what Caribbean countries can do is, if I can use on this methodology is, when you're sending people for education, in countries like in many African states, they're sending their students for scholarships here and there. But this is where they can access education and pursue their economic interest in the digital economy. Because at the end of the day, internet is a human right. You don't need to have very fast internet. As long as you have access to internet with a decent amount of bandwidth, the world's your market. So Brunei is going towards the digital economy. So we're adopting Industrial Revolution 4.0. A good example that we are doing now is every citizen is connected with the Brunei Health app, where, for example, you can do video consultation with your doctors from your mobile phones. So that's something that we always wanted to do for maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but COVID made it happen. So I guess we have to start early. You don't need to wait like, suddenly the oil is run out, then you suddenly convert to digital economy. You have to start now while the reserves are still there, while you're still you're still being able to send people to school, for free education. But when the time comes, we are more prepared rather than, we're basically not knowing what to do when COVID-19 happens. But when the crisis came, at least we're more prepared for whatever uncertainties that may come. So it might sound a bit hopeful, but again, being a small country, being a small state, being hopeful is sometimes the thing that keeps you going and keeps you, moving towards and learning from your lessons from that one. I hope that answers your question, Robert.
Just one last question. I have one last question, Joseph, if I may, it's real quick.
Really quick. We're running short on time.
This is from Matthew. I noticed that China and Singapore have set up a bubble, travel bubble. I also know that Thailand is going to do that. Do you think travel bubbles are effective, and do you think you'll start to see them in the Caribbean?
Well, thank you, Robert, for that question. In fact, many of the countries have started that months ago, especially for Eastern Caribbean states. They have done that. The members of the OECS, like Antigua and Barbuda, St. Lucia, Dominica, etc., St. Kitts and Nevis. So they've done a travel bubble. And now they're expanding it through other countries like Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and so forth. The Dutch territories themselves have already done that earlier on because they share many resources together, as well as the French territory. So in the Caribbean, they are expanding towards the wider Caribbean. But that being said, larger countries such as Jamaica or Dominican Republic have been specifically excluded, like the Dominican Republic because of its high COVID and numbers, and in Haiti as well. So there is a travel bubble, but it's very limited to the ones that are actually controlling the pandemic itself.
Okay, thank you so much. For those of you who are listening via audio, we're going to share the outcome of this conference eventually, and some of the because we're also shooting this live on our Facebook page. There are a couple of questions like when are we going to have this conference again? I think just send us your email and we'll keep you abreast of next year's event. Obviously, this year is almost gone. We were supposed to have this conference in April, and because of COVID, we changed, and now we are doing it virtual and all that. So having said that, I wanted to introduce the widow of Michael Gershowitz. She joined us. I don't know whether she would, Tova, I don't know whether she would like to say one or two words before I turn it over to Joseph to really wrap it up. Tova, it's over to you.
You're on mute.
You unmute yourself.
Hi, I've been on since the beginning, but I just didn't turn the picture on. Thank you. No, I just want to repeat thank you. And I spoke a little yesterday, Uchenna, you may not have been on, but I said how much I miss Michael's guidance and counsel in these perilous times. And I did forget to say, but I think my son mentioned that Mike was in the National Guard. And when I said perilous times, I remembered that he had told me always that he was in the National Guard serving in Newark, New Jersey, when the riots broke out in '67, I think it was. And he would be so proud of everything you're doing. I'm hoping that as we get closer to a recognition that there can be a peaceful transition of power here, because I think Mike would have been very upset to see the last 4 years and what's transpiring in America and around the world. So I'm hoping that as you guys, and we're all trying to move towards a more peaceful and hopeful tomorrow, that we actually get there with the vaccine, with COVID, with hunger, with climate change, with everything. Thank you guys very, very much, all of you.
Well, thank you so much. That was a very hopeful message to end on. I want to thank all the panelists. Thank you, especially those who stayed up late in their countries to attend this. Thank you guys so much, and we hope to see you next year. Have a great day.
Oh, you take care also. I wanted to say one more thing, just a second. In Hebrew, there's a phrase, chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek, that when each time they finish a book of the Torah, of the 5 books of Moses, they raise the Torah and they say, chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. In English, it is, be strong individually, be strong, and we shall all be strengthened. And I love that. You be strong individually, and we shall all be strengthened together. So chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek to all of us.
So much for everyone.
Thank you so much.
The Dean also, he has been very supportive of this program. I'd like to thank him especially. And every one of you, Edmond has been wonderful. And of course, Bob himself, will keep on cross-checking each other, changing schedules, he will edit and, back and forth. Then we'll pass it on to Dr. Manifield. Then Edmond is touching base with all the tech. Then Robert is there. So it's been amazing. And I think hopefully next year we're going to meet in person. Thank
God
you
willing. Yeah.
to everyone.
Thanks.
All right.
All right.
All right.
Enjoy your day.